Hey everybody, welcome to the Magic Weekly News Update for April 10th, 2017 on the Leek. I'm John as always, and it's a very slow news week because, of course, the big news is spoilers, and I've been doing the spoiler recaps every single day. We're halfway through. Spoilers will be complete on Friday afternoon, which, of course, will be the first day that I will have a set review up Friday afternoon for all the white cards in Amonkhet. But there were two pieces of news that we'll talk about this week. The first piece of news is Gatewatch related. Somebody asked Mark Rosewater on the Blogatog about the Gatewatch appearing on so many cards. They said, we have another standard environment with a top level Liliana and Gideon. I get you want to push the Gatewatch, but the same ones are a little tiring. I will say, A, we have a great looking Gideon and Liliana. We don't know anything about standard. It could be that they're terrible. Who knows? I don't imagine that's going to be the case, but come on. Don't get ahead of yourself, Magic community. I know you like to, though. But Mark Rosewater responded very well, saying, you know, when we thought up the Gatewatch, we thought that we should have them appear, every single one of them, on a card in Standard at all times. Of course, he does remind you that Standard at the time was 18 months, as opposed to now. He then said, as we started to roll this plan out, we got feedback from many of you that this was problematic. Many people hate that there is this focus on the Gatewatch. However, I feel like I've seen way more complaints about the story being focused on the Gatewatch. I've obviously heard the Gideon complaints, and I've heard it a little bit, but I feel like I've heard way more people just whining about the story more than anything else. We'll talk about that in a second. But Mark Rosewater said, yes, starting with Hours of Devastation, we will dial back on this. So starting with Hour, he says, we've pulled back significantly on how often Gatewatch Planeswalkers appear. They'll appear when it's important, but at a much slower rate. We will use those slots instead to do more returning and new Planeswalkers. I like this change. I'll say this, and I promise you, between this and the invocations, I'm not trying to be controversial. I just hold opinions that are different from at least the loudest group of Magic community people, and I like the Gatewatch. My favorite thing when I played Magic the first time around as a kid was the continuing story of the Weatherlight. I unfortunately, and I really need to go back at some point, I actually stopped playing Magic before the Weatherlight saga kind of ended. I only got as far as a little bit past Exodus, but I loved that continuing story with the same characters. Everything kind of felt important block to block. Nothing felt kind of segmented and like, oh, here's a story, now let's throw it away and forget about it forever. I love there was this huge overarching story, and I love that we have it again with the Gatewatch. You know, doing the Eldrazi, and Nicol Bolas is clearly up to some shenanigans. Was he involved? Well, obviously he was involved in the Eldrazi the first time around. Anyways, I love connected story threads like that. That being said, I, even without overly dabbling in Constructed, was getting tired of seeing the same Gatewatch cards over and over as well. You know, I love seeing Saheeli and Dovin and all of these new and native to the plains planeswalkers. I think they're really cool. I thought Arlen Cord was really, really cool. So I am happy with this change, assuming that this means that the Gatewatch story is going to keep going, but we're just going to get less and less cards. You know, people have showed up on planes and part of the story and not been on a card. There was no Gideon card in Shadows over Innistrad block. However, he was a huge part of that story. So I'm hoping that that's what that means. I'm hoping that it doesn't mean that they're just going to dial back on the Gatewatch story, period. I know people get really whiny about Jace and friends, and I love the irony that people whine so much about Jace, Mr. Whiny Pants himself. They must see themselves in him, and it makes them angry. But anyways, I really do like the inner block storyline and continuity, so I hope that continues. But I also am very happy to hear that the card slots are going to be taken away from the Gatewatch a little bit, and we're going to get to see some cooler Planeswalkers. But I would be sad if this does mean that they're going to kind of can the Gatewatch story. Our second piece of news, our final piece of news, is a big rules change that actually happened. So this is much more mechanical and important to people who play Magic as opposed to following the lore. Split cards are going to have a rules change. Now, split cards, we've seen them a few times. The first time we saw them, they were a spell, and you could cast one or the other. And then we saw them as fuse cards in Dragon's Maze, where they had an ability called Fuse, where they were one card or the other card, or both if you wanted. Even that caused some confusion. I've had to clear up people's misconceptions that you can't cast an original split card as a fuse card. It has to be a fuse card. Now, of course, we're getting the Aftermath cards, which are split cards, and this is the first time that they actually have different types on them. Unless I'm forgetting some obscure original split card, they've always been a sorcery and a sorcery, or an instant and an instant. But now we have ones that are instants and sorceries, and that's going to come back in just a little bit. So, previously, split cards were dealt with very differently in several different situations. Generally, you could kind of pick and choose which half of the card you wanted to focus on that benefited you the best. So, for example, Goblin Dark Dwellers, which requires you to choose a card from your graveyard with converted mana cost 3 or less, would allow you to pick the cheap half of a split card, and then you could cast the expensive half of the split card. On the flip side, Transgress the Mind, which had you choose an expensive card from your opponent's hand, you could pick the expensive side to get rid of the whole thing. But then if we were looking at a Dark Confidant type of spell, which deals damage to you, or you lose life rather, I believe, for the converted mana cost of a card, took into account the entire thing. And there were other really weird things like Counterbalance just threw all of that out. And there was big confusions with what was the CMC of a split card. And the answer was, well, it really depends. And that was super confusing. Things are now going to get a whole lot less confusing, thankfully. Here, in quick sentences, is how it will work now. All split cards, when you're casting them and putting them on the stack, are just the half you're casting. This isn't really a change at all. In fact, in basically all but the most insane fringe cases, this is how it was before. But you can basically imagine that you are cutting the card in half, not throwing the other half, you're setting it aside for the moment, and you're just playing the half that you're playing. The CMC, the type, the color, everything about it is just the half you're playing when it's on the stack. Then, in every other situation ever, the card is everything on the physical card. Destined to Lead, for example, is a black-green instant sorcery card with a converted mana cost of 6. It's everything. In the graveyard, in your hand, in your library, in exile, everywhere. It is everything. Now, the most common concern that I've seen about this has been with Torrential Gearhulk style effects. With Torrential Gearhulk, you can target an instant and it becomes castable from your graveyard. Just like the Goblin Dark Dwellers targeting the cheap side to cast the expensive side, Gearhulk can target the instant side and cast the sorcery side, assuming it's a time that you could cast a sorcery. It doesn't change the rules of Magic. You can't cast them on your opponent's turn unless you have Quicken already or something like that. Note that this is not a change. I've seen people say, oh, well, this is just taking the confusion from CMC and putting the confusion on type. It's not putting the confusion on type. This confusion would have already existed. It's just we've never had instant sorceries before. We had instant, sorcery. So this is not a change to the rules. They are getting rid of one confusion and, yes, leaving this quote-unquote confusion about card types. However, this isn't the first time we've had multi-type cards. Multi-type cards have existed for ages. We just left a block where Destroy Target Artifact was a great effect because it could kill creatures if they were artifact creatures. It's exactly the same that a Torrential Gearhulk, which targets an instant, can target an instant sorcery. That's not confusing. That is something everybody already knows. Stop trying to say it's confusing. It's exactly the same. For me, I think that this is frankly a great change. Things will be way less confusing now because one huge part of the confusion has just been eliminated. There's going to be still some judge questions for sure, and yes, people are still going to try to cast things as though they had Fuse for some reason. Boy, Fuse, I love the mechanic of Fuse, but man, it causes a lot of questions, especially in Cube, I find. Now, does this make the game less complex? Absolutely. Absolutely, it makes it less complex. Is that always a problem? Absolutely not. One thing that this does do, which many people don't understand, and it comes from a game designer point of view, is that this opens up design space for split cards. Split cards could basically never have too powerful an effect on the one side, because even if they made it cost 72 mana to cast, it would just break the game if the other side was cheap and could be targeted by Goblin Dark Dwellers. You know, I target the 3 mana half of the spell with Goblin Dark Dwellers, cast the 72 mana spell that says I win the tournament. They couldn't print that card. They still won't print that card, but it opens up the design space. They don't have to be quite as careful because now it's not abusable like that. So with this change, the complexity does go down slightly, but I think the design space of split cards goes up quite a bit. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today. Pretty sparse weekend news because, of course, it was all spoilers. Next week, I would be shocked if we have much of any news unless some giant controversy breaks. But I also don't think I'll do a weekly news update anyways next week because, of course, we'll be doing the blue set review, I believe, on Sunday. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know what you think about the news today. Are you happy, upset with the split cards rules? What about the Gatewatch? Please feel free to whine about Jace in the comments, because you know that that's what Jace would do himself. Anyways, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at TheManaLeek. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeek, Twitch.tv/TheManaLeek, and Patreon.com/TheManaLeek if you want to become a backer there and get the rewards associated with that. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. It's always great to see that. Plus, it really helps with the discoverability. It helps new people find the channel, which helps me grow, which helps me expand the channel with new content like these weekly news updates and the spoiler recaps, which are brand new in the last few weeks. So check that out. Like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the next spoiler recap.